The GoHighLevel API version 2. I swear I have barely spent that much time on an API integration in the past couple of years, as this one literally took me days until we finally had a solution for the problems we face. And this even happens to me, and I built literally over 300-400 integrations for my very own product. So it's not surprising that there are so many people inside of my comments and as well inside of our agency not really knowing how the heck to set this thing up. So this whole video is an attempt of everything I learned so far and show you an actual setup that works, that you literally can implement into your business with a GoHighLevel API version 2 with features that are not supported by other platforms like Make.com, because obviously that would be way too easy. And I really hope this shortens the amount of time you need to spend on integrating their API with your very own business. To give you a little bit more of information, what we are going to do now and how I actually came up with that, I'm going to explain you a little bit why I needed that in the first place. Because inside of my agency, we are building voice AI agents that are able to schedule meetings, that view availability, etc. And if you know, with GoHighLevel, the old API is basically deprecated, it gets removed. So we have to use V2, and inside of V2, if we look over here to the high-level lead connector, you can scroll through all of those actions. There will not be a single one that supports calendars, even though the API supports it. So basically, with their integration, we cannot really set it up because it doesn't support it. So the only option we have is we need to set up something by ourselves, right? So I've tried everything. I literally set it up by custom code to figure out how the whole logic in the backend works. And I actually managed to get that to work, and then I kind of translated that into Make.com. So now we have a solution that literally only uses Make.com that creates that whole authentication workflow. And for your luck, like I like to share templates, you will get access to that whole setup completely for free. This is literally knowledge for the past couple of weeks for me boiled down in a single template. You get it without any costs directly inside of my resource hub. So simply head over to hub.integraticus.com, download your template, and you can follow me along the screen while actually watching me build it, and you have everything available there, so you can look into more details if you want to while watching it. Also, definitely grab yourself a coffee or another drink, because this is gonna be a longer one, since I literally cover everything that you need to know to understand how you can actually leverage the GoHighLevel API version 2. I'd also like to mention that you don't need to be a developer and you don't need to understand code, because everything is gonna be in a visual no-code builder. I will try to explain some more technical aspects like authentication with APIs in a visual way, but if you don't even know what an API is, it probably makes sense to watch one of my other videos that is linked up here, where I'm explaining more about the difference of webhooks and APIs, what it is and how they work, etc. So you will find tons of content about that on my channel as well. So if you're ready, let's dive right into it. To show you this complete setup from beginning to end, I'm going to prepare an example that was actually the case inside of my company. Like I mentioned, we basically wanted to fetch a calendar and find the availability in that calendar for that agent or that user that is interacting with it. I'm going to use a similar example to demonstrate that whole functionality, because this is literally covering most of it, what we need for authenticating with a V2 API, so that you can leverage that for mostly any kind of other endpoints that you would like. To get started, let's head right over to the screen. As you can see, I'm currently on the Make.com GoHighLevel page, because that's the one I showed you earlier, and there is literally no endpoint for a calendar booking, and I can also just search for calendar, and you can see it only finds the Google Calendar integration, but literally nothing else. So GoHighLevel by default doesn't integrate with a calendar, which is a massive issue, and I promise you it's not the only one. There are tons on tons of different API endpoints that are not available right within here. And I'm going to show you that by simply heading over to the high-level API. There's that page in the support portal, which you can find here with the API v2 docs, or you can also simply head over to their Spotlight, which is their documentation for the API. So by simply clicking on the integrations API, you can see down here that you have tons and tons of endpoints for a lot of different objectives inside of GoHighLevel. And as you can see, there are definitely more than the ones that Make.com offers. But there is another one that is interesting. It's called Make an API Call. And I've tried it, but I can already tell you now that this one also only works for a small percentage of all the endpoints available. Why this is the case, I'm gonna go into it in a bit. But for now, let's just acknowledge the fact that Make.com by itself with their standard integration is just not enough to make things work with GoHighLevel v2. Now, to actually set things up, we need something called a custom app, which you can create directly inside of the marketplace of GoHighLevel. So if you don't know where that's located, you simply Google for GoHighLevel Marketplace, and you will find something like this, where it says marketplace.gohighlevel.com. And we are now inside an app dashboard, and you can see I have a bunch of apps down here, which you probably don't, because I assume you probably sign up the first time, especially if you're not a developer. developer, because this portal is intended for developers. Like I mentioned, promise, you don't need to write any code. We're just gonna go through this whole thing visually, and you can literally set it up without writing anything. So it's super, super simple, but you need to understand the core concept behind GoHighLevel so that you understand actually what you need to configure when setting up the app. To actually set up the app, we're gonna do what we should always do, just click on the Create App button up here. Then we can give this whole thing an app name. I'm just gonna call it GHL app test. Obviously, you would name it the way you would like to name your app. You can probably just name it as your company name. So you have the app inside of your company name and you're good to go. The app type should be private. If you want to make it public, the app will basically be available inside of the GoHighLevel marketplace, which is nice if you're building a product. But if you, like me, and you just want to use this whole app inside of your business for your very own clients, I suggest you not to do it because it's a big pain in the... Because every time you want to change permissions, they need to be reviewed by the GoHighLevel team, which can take days, and it's just a big hassle. It pushes you back, so I just don't recommend it. Simply start with a private app. It's the easiest way, especially when you want to use it directly inside of your business. Then we have the distribution type, which you can either set for agency, sub-account, or what I like to do is just set it to both, which is just a thing about permissions, which of the API endpoints have permission to what. So if you just have an agency account and you literally just want to automate parts inside of your agency account, so not with a sub-account, you can simply set it up to agency. If you are planning just to use sub-accounts, then you only set it up to sub-accounts. This makes a difference when you authenticate people through the authentication process later on down the line. And I'm going to show you also how this looks like. If your customers are just interacting with your own page, it doesn't really matter. You can just structure that inside of a documentation. So in my case, or as well as how I see it and personally like to do it, I just set both of them because in the end, I don't need to set up two different apps for getting this whole thing working. I can just have one app and I can just define it inside of my documentation or my SOPs for my very own teammates. Then lastly is another very important one that you definitely should look into. It's the listing types, and you can set it to white label or standard non-white label. I would always suggest to leave it at white label because it supports everything. You can also see that by clicking here on Learn More. And once the documentation loads, you can see here the two different types. You can obviously read through all of that. I did that many, many times. But this is probably the most important part, which says white label apps are visible at the agency and sub-account levels under both white label and non-white label domains. So it supports everything, which is exactly what we want. You always want to reduce headache when building those apps, especially if you have never done it before. It just saves you a lot of time. That's exactly why we keep this at white label. And all I'm going to do now is I click on Create App. And ta-da! Now we have created our very first app, and now we are going to do something that's a little bit more complex, but it's super relevant, especially when you work with API. Because you need to define a scope. A scope is nothing else than a certain part of permission that you would like the app to have access to, which permissions then are also used for whatever you want to do with a user that authenticated inside of the app. Let's assume you're like me and you would like to use the calendar of a sub-account directly inside of GoHighLevel. In that case, we would need to add calendar permissions. To do that, what you need to do is you click here on the select scopes and you search for calendar. And as you can see here, you have a massive selection of different kind of properties or permissions that you can select for this app. So since I would like to interact with the calendar and maybe schedule meetings and maybe view bookings and stuff like that, what I can do is I can basically just set it to calendar read only and maybe even calendars write. If I want to see the exact events, I can also select more here, like events read only, events write, etc. For the example of this video, I'll try to keep it very simple. So I'm only going to add the calendars read only and calendars write, because for me, I want to show you how this app works without much friction so that you get an understanding of it. So this is enough for now. Obviously, if you would like your app to have access to more features, you can select them down here from the list. And there is another very important thing that I would like to mention. So when we are heading back to the documentation of GoHighLevel and you can scroll to the top, you'll find another menu item called Scopes. And when we head over to Scopes, you can see a massive list of all of the endpoints that are available with a given scope. This looks kind of useless in the beginning because we have them anyways in the menu item, but there is a very, very important difference. Because depending on the account you own, you have access to certain of those scopes. So not all of those scopes are available with the plan that you have in most cases. So if you run on the smaller GoHighLevel plan, you will have access to all of the endpoints that have the access type sub-account, which is great, which is the majority of all of those, as you can see here. But there are some, like if we are looking here, the locations.write, which is only available for companies. And the company access type is only available for the bigger plan of GoHighLevel on the company level and not on the location level or the sub-account level. So In that case, you would need to upgrade to a bigger plan if you would like to use something like the location endpoints. But as you can see, for the majority of it, Subaccounts is also available, so you don't need to worry. As well as here, as you can see, we have locations read only, which can also be part of both. So in that case, still the sub account is most likely sufficient if you don't want to deal with them on a company level. I found that a super important information because that alone took me ages to figure out because I had so many permission issues while setting up this whole app. So definitely make sure that the endpoints and the permissions you set definitely match with the plan that you have. If you have a smaller plan, stick to the sub account. If you have a bigger plan, you don't need to worry about it. So with that out of the way, let's head back into our marketplace where we are creating our app. So we have set now calendars read only, calendars write, and there is another one that I would like you to set in any case because we're going to need it for our automation. And this one is called location.read-only. And if we are looking now back into the documentation under scopes, locations.read-only, you can see that this one also is available on sub-accounts and company accounts. So whatever plan you use, this automation will work for you. And I'm going to tell you in a bit as well why this one is important. For now, let's just add it here. The webhooks we basically don't need to add right now. Webhooks is basically whenever something happens inside of GoHighLevel that you are notified by the webhook. You can set it up and then you need to provide a URL, etc. And you can automate that part as well. Since we would just like to interact with the API and we would actually like to access information on GoHighLevel, we don't need to set it up in that example. Now, when we scroll down past the scopes and the webhooks, you can find another field, which is the redirect URLs. And this one is just as important. This one is going to be also a bit more complex. You don't need to research anything. I'm going to provide you what you need to add there because we are integrating it directly with make.com, which automatically takes care of providing redirect URLs within an OAuth authentication flow 2.0. So all you would need to do is you need to click in the redirect URL field and you add this URL, which is also shown on the screen, and it is also mentioned inside of my research hub, so you can simply copy it and then click here on the add button. Now, as you can see here, it is added. This URL, by the way, is directly from make.com, even though it says Integromat. If you don't know about it, make.com was named or branded Integromat before it became make.com. This was a couple of years ago. They just changed it and rebranded once they have been bought by Celonis. Celonis basically is the parent company and it was part of their rebranding structure. So don't be confused why there's written Integromat. It is something they're working on, but for now, this OAuth callback that we need to use is still hosted on the Integromat domain instead of the make.com domain. By the way, if you scroll through their documentation, you will also find out about that. All right, once we've added that, we simply scroll down to the client keys, which is where we need to define a couple of keys that we then need to use directly inside of our make.com scenario. We definitely have to create those credentials, and it is also important to mention that you need to pre-save them somewhere, because once you click OK, they are gone, because for security reasons and stuff like that. So all we do is we click on add. We're gonna give this whole thing a name. So you would probably call it something like your company name. So I call it Integraticus Credentials, and I'm gonna click on add. And now you can see that we are basically creating a client ID and a client secret. Make sure to not share those with anyone. In my case, it doesn't matter because this is a demo account that literally just exists for this video, so I can demonstrate you the whole setup without hiding anything so that you get a better understanding of it. All I'm going to do now is I'll copy the client ID, I'll paste it into an empty editor, and I do the exact same thing with a client secret. Just gonna head it to the notepad right here. And we just need to keep them for now because we need to use them directly inside of our make.com scenario once we reach that part. Now heading back to the marketplace, we can click OK. And once I click OK, you will see that all of those are gone and I cannot see the client secret anymore. It will just not be available anymore. So if you have not copied it, your mistake, simply delete it and create a new one. We do not need to provide a webhook URL for now, because like we mentioned, we don't want to set up webhooks right now because webhooks is very simple. It literally just informs us on a specific event that happens directly inside of GoHighLevel. We also don't need to set any single sign-on, and the last part is for deleting the app, which is obviously also not what we would like to do. And honestly, most of those kind of side menus or the menu items down here, we don't even need to use. For the basic setup, this is literally all we need. Now we're going to click on save, and once this whole app has been saved, we still need to scroll down to the redirect URL and we need to activate it right here and clicking another time on save. So congratulations, this is literally all you need to get a basic app set up directly inside of the marketplace of GoHighLevel. We have configured it now, as you can see here, for the calendars read-only, calendars write, and the locations read-only permissions, which is all we need for this specific example. Again, if you would like to have access to different features directly inside of the API, it is important that you select the right permission here, which you can also compare to the endpoints inside of the documentation under the scopes. So that was the easy part. Let's head now to the make.com scenario, because that is where we're probably going to spend most of the time. So I've already prepared a scenario right here. It is an empty one. This is where we are basically creating that whole setup so that we can then leverage that to make authentications to the API and to access it. I definitely have to mention that this setup works out of the box, but I 100% suggest you to optimize it even further so that you can store the temporary access tokens that are generated through the API key in a table or maybe in your very own CRM, wherever you need them, so that you can access them at any given point without regenerating them over and over again. If that doesn't make sense what I just said right now, just stick with me. If you know, very good. I will anyways show you that whole thing at the end. I just wanted to mention it upfront because this scenario works in theory and works practically as well. But if you want to get the most out of it, you have to make a couple of small adjustments along the way, just to not run into kind of rate limit issues if you really start scaling this thing up. All right, you would obviously have some kind of scenario set up where you would basically like to interact with the API. In a lot of cases, that's probably going to be something like a webhook endpoint that you can add with webhooks and then the custom webhook. In my case, I'm literally just going to start with the tools because we don't have anything else to trigger, and I literally just want to show you how you can create the integration itself. So first of all, we go to tools. We're gonna set multiple variables because there are a couple of variables that we would like to set that we want to interact with. And I'm gonna guide you through all of them step by step. Now, the first one is going to be location_ID. And for the value, we are going to use the location of the sub-account that we want to use. If that sounds confusing to you, location is basically the API definition within GoHighLevel that describes a sub-account. So you can say location equals sub-account, just as an example. Now, once we head into our GoHighLevel account, which I have mine right here, and it is a demo account that runs on their higher tier API plan, what I would need to do is I basically grab the slug of the location, and it is located directly inside of the URL after the location/URL part. As you can see here, I just double click it, I copy it, I head back into my make.com scenario, paste it right within here. This is step number one. The next step is, because I would like to integrate a calendar, I'm gonna set another variable and I call this one calendar ID. Now, I head back into my GoHighLevel setup, and as you can see, I have created a demo calendar, and I'm just gonna copy this ID because this is the ID for the API that we can just use inside of our make.com scenario. So heading back into make.com, I'm gonna paste that inside of our variable value. And I'm also going to define another variable that I'm just keeping empty for now, because all I want is that it is predefined, because we automatically fill it. Because I just realized that for me, it was fairly difficult to find the ID of a company, because in the dashboard, it is not that easily visible. Maybe I missed it somewhere. But this way, it's just a bit smoother because you don't need to worry about the company ID. All you would need to provide is the location ID, and we can basically fetch the company ID from the location ID. All right, now we simply click on OK once it looks something like this with your credentials or with your IDs right here. And now we come to the first more complex part. Like I mentioned, the high-level API is nice, but it definitely doesn't support anything of the things that I need. So we are ignoring the fact that the GoHighLevel API is integrated as an integration, and we are going to use what I always like to use, the HTTP module. And if you're not familiar with this module, all it does is basically allow you to create HTTP calls to the internet. Imagine you are opening Facebook or you're opening Google. In that case, you make a request and Google sends you the stuff back. It's nothing else than what the HTTP module does as a very basic explanation. And this would happen usually with the make a request setup or the make a request action. In our case, obviously, since we work with GoHighLevel, it's gonna be a little more complex than that. What we are going to use is make an OAuth 2.0 request, because the GoHighLevel v2 version of the API supports only OAuth 2.0. And by the way, you can see this as well by clicking over here and go to authorization. You can see that it requires an OAuth 2.0 flow. So it also describes a couple of small setup steps here, which we're going to get into in a second too. Now, let's just head back to our make.com scenario, and all I'm going to do now is I select this make an OAuth 2.0 request, and you will see that it just adds a request with a lot of fields here that kind of look like alienated. If you know what I'm talking about, probably gonna be simple, but if you have never seen a request setup, this is how it looks like. And trust me, there's more to that. It's not the only thing, because this is already the secondary part that we are taking care of. Because now the first thing we want to do is actually access information within the API. So to actually do that and basically run through this whole OAuth flow that is supported by this element, we click up here on add, which then adds a new connection name, which anyways you have to do when you set this thing up the first time, which I assume you do. So for the connection name, you just define something meaningful. In my case, I would just say integrated GHL app, which would probably be the custom app that we created. As an authorization, as a flow type, you select authorization code, which is nothing else that during that authentication process, it basically provides you a code that is inside of a query parameter of the URL. You will never see that. You don't need to worry about it. If you would like to understand it, look up the Authentication 2.0 flow. You will get a better understanding of it. I'm gonna link some resources as well inside of my resource hub, so you can look into it if you're really keen on how this works. Now for the next part, the authorized URI, which is a very important one. This is basically the URI that is used to create this whole redirect so that we can actually authenticate with our very own app directly inside of our browser. So to do that, we head over to the GoHighLevel documentation, as you can see here. And on the page that I mentioned on authorization, all you would need to do is you scroll down a little bit until you can see here, get the app's authorization page URL. So it looks complex, but all we're gonna do is we locate the question mark in this whole URL. Obviously in every URL, there's only one question mark because that is what separates the URL from the query parameters. And all we do now is we basically copy everything before the question mark, which is this whole part of the URL. You can also see that there are two different things. Before I mention, yeah, it's important to mention. For standard auth URL flow and for the white label auth URL flow. In our case, since we have set up a white label app anyways, we are going to use this URL down here, which also has the only difference of the domain. This one is hosted on GoHighLevel, this one is hosted on Lead Connector HQ, and I can promise you, it does not matter if your app is on a custom domain or if it is on this white label domain. I've tried both, it both work. To make sure everything is compliant, I just suggest you to use the Lead Connector HQ domain. So again, we're gonna copy everything before the question mark, copy that, I head back into my mac.com flow, I'm gonna paste that inside of the authorized URI. Now we have another part, which is the token URI, which is in the end the URL that will receive the custom token or the custom code once you have been authenticated during that OAuth flow. To actually get the token URI, all you would need to do is you need to head into the GoHighLevel documentation, and within the menu here, you can see an OAuth 2.0 setup or item. Once you click on the sub item down here, you can see 3 different endpoints. I promise you don't need to understand all of them now. The first one that we are interested in is the get access token, because this is the one where we basically can retrieve a company access token for our app. And this company access token is then able to give us access tokens for all of our locations / subaccounts. I know that it's very complex and the process behind it is a little bit off and it's not following all of the standards like I would like to see it inside of an app, but that is not our problem. Our problem is that we could not use it and I tried to find solutions for that. So here we are. Now what we need to do to actually get it added to make.com, we're going to click here on this get access token URL. We're gonna copy that part, we head back into our make.com scenario and we paste it into this URL field. Now, GoHighLevel has a little bug, which is right here, because what they do is they make the last part bold to just highlight the actual endpoint, which is nice visually, but the problem is it breaks the URL inside of the workflow. As you can see here, it has an empty space, which I tap here. This is an issue because it breaks the URL, so all you would need to do is you simply delete this endpoint. So now it's gone. We have the whole URL. It is a full URL, which is exactly what we would like. So the connection we are setting up right now is there to authenticate ourselves with our company account or our agency account on GoHighLevel. This is literally the most basic step where we need to set permissions so that we can access others' accounts or other sub-accounts directly through our app with our GoHighLevel account. Now, once you've done that, the next thing we need to do is setting up the scopes. And if you remember scopes, we have defined that inside of our marketplace app right here, selected scopes. So as you can imagine, we need to define the scopes directly inside of our scenario here. So all I do is I click on a new scope. I'm gonna type calendars.write, which is the first one we want to set. We want to also set calendars.read only. And lastly, we would also like to set locations.read-only, because those are the exact ones we have defined right here within our app. Now, there's another thing that probably causes tons of issues if you don't do it, because GoHighLevel specifically would like to have the scopes defined with a space in between and not separated by a comma, like I would want to usually see it. So again, it is not the exact and best setup because there can be other issues involved, but GoHighLevel wants it like this, so we need to make sure it works. So if you would save this whole connection later on, it would probably break and it will not work the way it should. So what you would need to do for making the scopes work, you click down here on this little button for show the advanced settings, and you can now see a scope separator. You want to change that from comma to space. Very, very important step, because I promise you, you will get tons of 400 errors directly inside of your authentication process. Now, with that set up, we can actually set up the client ID as well and the client secret, which are the ones that we copied earlier. So all I'm going to do is I head back to my notepad or wherever you basically stored your credentials. We copy the client ID. I'm gonna paste it into this field. I'm gonna copy the client secret and I'm gonna paste the client secret in the client secret field. That's it. Now, if you have been logged in or if you are logged in into your GoHighLevel account, awesome, because you need to anyways once we're clicking on save down here, because this is the time where we now actually run through the very first OAuth flow for authenticating our company with our app, which means that our app has access to that whole setup. So we basically interact through our marketplace app directly with the accounts that we connect with it. So in our case, I'm basically just using my account as an example so that we can access it directly through this app, which is obviously what you would like because we are connecting it within make.com anyway. All right, I'm gonna click save and you can see now that a new pop-up comes up, which now wants us to authenticate with GoHighLevel. And as you can see here, it basically opens a new URL, which is very interesting because it contains all of the parameters that are defined, that we basically defined within the module that we just set up. And you can see here, redirect URI, which is the Integromat URL that we set up with the client ID. We have a response type, which is code, also what we defined earlier. And you can see here all of the scopes that we defined, separated by an empty space, which in URL parameters is defined as %20. Great, so now if everything works and you basically set it up so far, you should be able to see your agency account here and your sub account. And since my goal basically is to interact with the sub account, what I'm going to do is I click on the Integraticus sub account down here, and I'm basically just waiting until it refreshes, as you can see now. And now you will see the connection up here if everything worked out. If not, you will see definitely a red error message directly inside the authentication process with a very unclear problem. And I promise you, this is one of the worst parts of the whole GoHighLevel documentation because there's literally no visual error handling. You get a 400 error and you have no freaking idea why it's happening and what is the reason for it. So there is no other solution than reaching out to their tech support. I hope they fix it at the point I'm releasing this video. However, I honestly don't think it's gonna happen. Great, so what we did so far is we authenticated ourselves through the app so that the app can basically access our sub account and we can interact with our sub account. Awesome, this is step number 1. So now to actually make the authentication to the calendar ID or the calendar setup, what we would need to do is we need to define the calendar URL right within here. And I need to mention that this only works because we have defined a sub account during the authentication process while setting up the connection. If you would have set up an agency account, there is a lot more that we need to do, which I'm also gonna guide you through in a moment. But for now, what we need to do to actually just access the calendar, which I think is the exact thing that you would like to achieve, which is what we would like to achieve, right? We want to connect ourselves to the calendar. In that case, this setup is perfectly fine. What we need to do is now we need to define the calendar URL, and you can do this by going here over the documentation. You scroll in the menu down to calendars and you click on the get calendar endpoint, which looks something like this. So we basically copy the URL. I'm gonna head back into my make.com scenario. I'm gonna paste it right within here. And you can see now as well that there is a placeholder for the calendar ID. I'm gonna remove that and I replace it by the calendar ID we defined as a variable over here. I have it as get, and we also have to define the version of the current API. GoHighLevel just wants us to do that. So to actually add the version, we simply click on add a header. We're gonna define in the name field version, and to get the version, we basically just scroll down here to that version inside the header string, and you can see it as an allowed value. We're gonna copy that part, going to head back, and I paste it in the value field. So that's it. Now we have access to our calendar if we have been authenticated with a sub account during that authentication process of this connection. I'm gonna show you how that works. I'm gonna click OK, and I'm gonna run the scenario once. And if everything works out, you will get back a status code 200, and you will get back the data of the calendar, as you can see here, which is exactly what we would like. So now we basically managed to create a successful connection for a sub account directly with GoHighLevel. Now, this is the easy version, which I'm just gonna keep here. I'm gonna do another thing because we are basically just creating another connection. I'm just gonna disconnect that one. I'm gonna add another module, do the same thing with the HTTP module and the OAuth 2 request. And now we are running through that whole OAuth 2 flow again, but in that case, I'm gonna set it up with an agency so that you see how it actually looks like if I would connect through an agency account instead of a sub account. So I'm just gonna call this part Integraticus GHL agency. We keep it as an authorization code. I'm gonna run through the exact same setup again. So we scroll up to authorization. I'm going to copy here that choose location URL. I'm gonna paste it in this field. We're gonna go within here to the access token URL. Gonna copy this part, gonna paste it here, remove this space. I add the scopes again. All right, now we're gonna add the client ID and client secret again, just like we did it before. And we also need to set the separator to a space. And now I'm gonna click on save. And during the authentication process now, instead of selecting a sub account, I'm gonna select the agency. And I'm gonna select as well, allow access to all sub accounts, which means now I can basically use our agency account with access to all of the sub accounts below it. Which means if you manage your very own clients and you don't wanna set it up for each and every single sub account this way, there is another way that I'm gonna demonstrate you right now, which you can leverage to just access that same API for other agency or for other sub accounts. So you click on allow access to all sub accounts for Integraticus and you click on proceed. And if everything works out, it should work, but you can see now that I'm getting a 400 error that is very undefined, so it doesn't really tell you exactly what is wrong, it just tells you that something is wrong. So what I will do now is I probably think I have done something wrong in the scopes maybe. We can actually verify that by just going to the URL and scrolling to the very end, because the scopes are always defined at the end. Right here you can see we have calendars.write, which looks correct. We have separated it by a space. We have calendars.read only, which looks correct, separated by a space. And we have locations. Oh, there's the issue. So as you can see, I have no S right within here. So what I would do is I would basically just go back. I'm just gonna close this task or close this window, which then should refresh this part right here, that we basically don't get an authorization, which I hope works. And apparently it doesn't, so I'm just gonna close that and I'm gonna do the exact same thing again. So just bear with me, All right, so I basically just set up everything again. We have added our authorized URI, token URI, our scopes, and now I also made sure I added the S at the end, because that was missing in the previous scope. So I basically just wrote it wrong, and that's why it didn't work. And again, it just doesn't tell you the scope is wrong, it just tells you 400, bam. It just throws you an error and you have literally no idea what's going on. So that's why I mean it's very, very poorly created if it comes to error handling. Anyways, we ignore that fact. I'm gonna click now on save down here. And we basically just run through this whole authentication process again, which we have anyways done before. So we're gonna select the agency account again. We're gonna allow sub accounts. I'm gonna click on proceed. And now if everything works out well, we're basically getting connected with make.com, which happens here, as you can see, verify connection, and now we are connected. Awesome. So what I'm going to do now is I'm basically just using the endpoint that I had in my previous setup up here. So let's just connect that part. I'm gonna copy this URL because I just want to demonstrate you that we can try to use the exact same URL, but it will not work because we don't have the user or the location permission at this given time. So to actually do that, what we're gonna do is we set this part up here. I'm gonna again define the version, define it here. And this should be it. I'm gonna click here on yes. And this should be literally the whole setup. If I'm gonna click OK. And now I basically test the setup. So I can just disconnect this part because this was the agency module, the sub account module. I'm just gonna call this sub account permission. Okay. And this one we're gonna call agency permission. I'm gonna click OK. So, and if I run this whole thing now, you will see that here we're gonna get a 401, which says this auth class type is not allowed to access the scope. Please reach out to our team to get it added. I promise you, don't reach out to your team. I'm gonna show you the exact fix for that, because right now with this authentication, since we have chosen the agency level, we basically cannot authenticate directly to a location level because we didn't obtain the authorization code for that sub account level. So for that, we would basically do a secondary auth flow. So what you've seen here is the very simple sub account flow. This one works great, and this works great if you just want to work with one sub account. And this one down here is just more awesome if you work on an agency level. So you basically say, you give your app access to every single sub account inside of your agency account so that you can access them separately whenever you need it. This is the main difference, basically. So now, since we have authenticated this part, this one doesn't work because now we have authenticated to an agency level, but we cannot just authenticate to the location, like I mentioned, because we have no location permission. So since we have been authenticated to the company or to the agency account, which is great, so we basically ran through this whole process here with retrieving the access token for that agency, we now need to do a secondary authentication step for the actual permissions of the location. So, and this is what this second endpoint is for right here. You can see it's called get location access token from agency token. And agency token is obviously the one that we just got right now. And you can see here another URL which is called auth/location token. We're gonna copy that part, and we're gonna now reuse this exact same module with the agency authentication. But now, instead of directly accessing the endpoint, we need to make a couple of more sub-steps to be able to access it. So to actually do that, we paste this URL we just copied with this auth/location token, as you can see here. And you can also see that it is a post request. So we need to change the method to post. We can keep the version right here. And now if we look into it, we also have to define inside of the body a company ID and a location ID, which we can do directly here. This is a major difference, because we would not even be able to use this exact setup directly inside of an OAuth flow that we could basically run through up here, because this specific authentication requires information in the body, which is not native to a standard OAuth flow. This is just a side note, but I just want to make sure that you understand that this needs to be a custom request that cannot be the exact same like you would do it inside of an OAuth flow. That's why we basically make this authentication using the agency token directly inside of another step. Within here, what we can do now is we basically can go down here to the body type. We select application form URL encoded. You will also see that, by the way, right within here, you can send it as a X-form URL encoded, which is the exact content type we have just selected here. The reason we use it is because it's simpler and you can literally just add the fields visually. So now we have to define these two fields. We need to define company ID and location ID. Let's just define them here. We have location ID and we're gonna have company ID. So for the location ID, it's gonna be straightforward because we have it right here. But as you remember, I mentioned earlier that we do not have the company ID right here. And honestly, I don't even know where exactly to locate it inside of the GoHighLevel account. So what did I did, as lazy as I am, I basically just created another endpoint that contains the location ID that we can leverage to get the company ID from. So this is exactly why we have added the company ID variable right within here. So for the basic setup of that sub account, we don't need it. But for the sake of the agency permissions, or the agency setup, we definitely do need it. So how do we get this connected? For that, we need to unlink this part. We're gonna copy this module for the agency permission. We add it here. And now within here, we need to retrieve the location itself, because the location contains the company ID in the details. So to do that, we're gonna head back to the documentation over here. And you can now see when you scroll down in the sidebar for a little bit, you should be able to see locations, which is that part. You're gonna click on this and you can see get location. This is the endpoint we would like to use. So from this endpoint, we're gonna get the company ID. So what I do now is I paste this one here. I replace this placeholder with a company, with a location ID, with the actual location ID. And let me see, I don't think there's anything else necessary. Yeah, you can see the location access token and the agency access token. Another thing I'd like to mention is that inside of the request, you can see here that we have two different kind of tokens, because they both can be accessed through the same scope as we have seen earlier. So if you go up here to the scopes, we're gonna open this in a new tab. And we're gonna now look into the location permission that we set up earlier. Locations.read-only, you can see that this can be accessed by subaccount and company. And this is the exact reason why you see two different authentication methods here. Obviously, you only need to use one depending on the setup that you have. Since in our example, we set it up now with an agency account down here, we need to use the agency authentication, which, by the way, make.com takes care automatically, because we already have set up our permissions during the OAuth 2.0 flow. So this is just a side note. We basically never need to do anything here. It is just for you a mental reminder that only one needs to be defined, which make.com does automatically. So you don't even need to use the location access token in that case. Now we have the location ID, which is the one that we have basically added to the URL. And this seems all to be okay. So what I would do now is, I can see I actually have it still inside of that bottom setup, which we don't need here. So I'm just going to remove those parts. And you can see this is the exact setup we need. So let me see, we have it post, but I think honestly this one was also a get. So yep, we need to change this one to a get request as well. And that should be it. I'm gonna click OK, and I'm just gonna run this whole thing once. And if everything works out now, we should be able to obtain an access token for a location level. So it already worked, but the explanation I gave you was for a different part. So again, this URL and this request is specifically just to return the company ID, which is what we need for making the actual authentication request for that sub account. So I've already done it, but I click OK again and I click on run once, and you can see now once it ran through, you can see in the response a status code 200. And once you see a status code 200, you managed to do it. You actually got the information back from the location, which means that your agency account was connected and it could access the location through the agency level. And inside of the data, we can now see location, and then we can see company ID, which is the ID that we want. So now, since we would like to use that variable, what I'm going to do is I'll just add a new module here. I'm going to click on tools. I'm going to click on get variable. I'm going to call, this is the wrong one actually. I want to set a variable because we just want to update it. I'm going to click here. I'm going to click on set variable. I'm going to define the variable like we did it in the first module, company ID. And as a variable value, I'm now selecting the company ID from the dynamic field that we just returned. It's important for you that if you want to actually use it like this, that inside of that module, you turn on this parse response, because otherwise it's just a JSON. You could still use it as a JSON with a JSON module to parse the JSON, but I would just ignore that mess and just simply set this field. It's literally the easiest. So now we basically set this value as well inside of the company ID field right here. And what we do now is we basically click on here, we connect this agency permission module, and now it is time for us to actually connect the URL where we basically can get the actual location token. So since this one didn't work in the first place, now it will work, but we cannot use the exact same connection module. So what I need to do is actually, I need to remove this module and I need to recreate it without the O authentication flow. So apparently right now during the setup, I forgot to do one specific thing and I deleted this module right here, which we basically copied for creating this agency permissions in the first place. So what I wanted to show you is that we need to use that exact same authentication of the agency level to obtain the key on the subaccount or location level. So unfortunately, I have to recreate it, but I'm going to do this with you here. So I'm just copying or cloning the module that we had earlier, which contains the GHL agency connection that we set up before. But now instead of accessing the location, what we're going to do is we're going to head over to the documentation. We go to the get location access token setup. We're going to copy the URL over here. I paste this one back into here. We need to select the post method here because this authentication requires the post request for whatever reason. And I think because we send the body along, that is probably why. We're going to also need to define the version inside of the header. So I'm going to take this part and I paste it here. We have already done that. So this is okay. We have also select form URL encoded, which is still set. I think with this one, we probably don't even need it, but it doesn't matter. It still works. And now we need to define those two keys. And those two keys are for the company ID and for the location ID. As you can see right within here in the body, company ID and location ID. Those two we definitely need to define. So I'm just going to paste them here. I'm going to paste them here. So now for the location ID, I'm going to add the location from the initial step. And for the company ID, I'm going to select the company ID from the variable. Now, we basically don't even need to define the variable in the first place. We could also just select the company ID from the location down here. The reason I have variables is because I just like to make things more object-oriented, so I can use them in a smarter way down the line, and I can just adjust them or replace them if I need to through other automations. This is just a neat step to do that helps you in the end to make things a bit smoother, and I always like to make things smoother. So that's exactly why we have it in a variable. We're going to set the parse response again to yes. I'm going to click OK. And now if we've done everything the right way, we should be able to obtain an access token on a location level instead of an agency level. So to do that, we're going to click on run once. We see that everything runs through, which is great. So we already don't have a specific error that breaks the whole scenario. The most important part is once I click on the bubble. And now you can see we have a status code 201, which means the authentication worked, which is exactly what we wanted. This alone took me literally a couple of days until I managed to make it work and understood the whole thing with the support, but it works. And we can now see inside of the data construct that we have an access token, a token type, which is bearer, an expiry in, and a refresh token. So this is where it gets a little bit more interesting, where I need to just tell you a bit more about what we need to do with this setup in the first place. Or actually, before I'm destroying your vision of making this thing work in a more smarter way, I'm just gonna show you the way that it actually works, even having this setup. So just bear with me. We now have the access token obtained. So now what we can do is we can already access the calendar from a sub-account level. So this is literally kind of the equivalent to what we did here, except of that we have not set up the location endpoint yet. So what we do for the location endpoint, again, we're not going to use the GoHighLevel app. We click on adding a new app, we select HTTP, and now we are selecting the make a request endpoint. So this literally just starts a standard endpoint that we can use to get the calendar. So again, in the GoHighLevel documentation, here on the left, we're going to go to get calendar, and we're copying this calendar URL like we did it in the sub-account setup. I'm going to add this to the URL field. I'm going to replace the placeholder with the actual calendar ID from our variables. And now within the method, we keep it as get. we need to define again the version inside of the header. You can see that the version was defined right within the documentation too, so I just paste it as a value. And now we should be already there. I'm going to set it to parse response. The only difference is, since we are now using a normal HTTP module, we also need to take care of the authentication ourselves. And this is exactly why we have done this step in the first place, because we have obtained that access token directly from within the Subaccount. So we need to add a new header. We're gonna call this one authorization. And here in the value, we're gonna say bearer space. And then within the step here, which is the module 8, you can see module 8 right here, we're gonna go on the access token and we paste that access token. This is very important because this authenticates our setup with that get calendar endpoint. And you can see that here as well with the security step, bearer auth, which is defined as authorization, bearer with a space, and then the actual token. So now we're gonna head over here, we're gonna click on OK. And if everything is set up the correct way, we should now also be able to get the calendar through an agency level setup. So I'm gonna click again on run once, I run this whole thing. And if we click now on 1, you can see we get a status code 200, which is exactly what you would like. And inside of the data, you can now see the whole calendar, just like we have done it in that step up here. So I'm just gonna show you this whole beauty now in one step. So you can see how it works and that it works. So right here, you can see we have 200, we have the calendar data, which is the exact same one, NO, and we have the same on an agency level right here on the calendar, NO. So, my friends, this is the basic explanation on how you can authenticate with a custom app directly inside of make.com with a GoHighLevel v2 API. I know it is massively complex, and I really hope this brings a little bit more of clarity to yourself so that you have a better understanding on how to set it up in both possible ways. And there is another thing that I mentioned earlier on how you can optimize the setup, because since we have now obtained an access token and we actually got the whole authentication flow different. Let's reform it in a different way. Because this is not just a single OAuth flow, that is actually 2 OAuth flows combined in one module. Why? Because we have the OAuth flow that we connected with in the beginning, and then we are using this connected OAuth flow to make another OAuth flow request that follows the notation of within GoHighLevel, defined as here in the get location access token setup, to retrieve another authentication flow setup. So while this works right here, there's another thing I need to mention, because we have an access token, but you can see that it expires in 24 hours. So it expires in 24 hours and then it will not be valid anymore, which means right now we are creating for every single request another access token that could be valid for 24 hours and could be used for 24 hours. So to make sure not to create too many access tokens, if you want to make the setup better and perfect, what you would need to do is you would need to store this access token somewhere, and you would need to calculate a timestamp, maybe from the current time. Maybe subtract a couple of minutes, let's say minutes might be the best, because we don't know how much latency there's going to be in between. And then you create another timestamp, and you basically add all of this into a custom table, maybe a Google Sheet, maybe Airtable, maybe you use the directly built-in database of make.com. And then you can add another module here where you basically compare if that expiry date was already reached. And if it was reached, you can make the exact same request to the endpoint using the refresh token, which is defined right here. And this refresh token then will give you again another access token that you can then use to make another request. This would be the exact and perfect setup. Obviously in this tutorial I'm not including it because it depends a little bit on your setup and how you would like to manage and handle it. But if you want to set this up yourself, I definitely suggest you check out Authentication 2.0 so that you get an understanding of how that stuff works behind the scenes. But yeah, with this setup now, you should be already able to create and connect your very own app to your store, and you can literally manage your own clients or yourself through this app directly inside of make.com without ever sacrificing the fact that you don't have access to all of those endpoints. And if you're still here, since you heard me in the beginning saying that I do not recommend the direct make.com authentication setup for the API, it is because the scopes just don't match. So I'm going to explain you this in another example that I'm going to add down here, just so you have seen it. And now I'm going to search for the GoHighLevel setup. I think it's called HighLevel Connector, which is this one, correct? And here we can scroll down to take that make an API call action. I'm going to click on it. And you can see now that I basically have to define another connection with GoHighLevel. So now it is an actual GoHighLevel connection, which means that you do not even need a custom app to make it work. So if those permissions that they support is enough for your case, you might not even need to use the custom app. But I need to warn you, I've seen it very often that customers would like to have different kind of scopes and maybe want to integrate more things. And in that case, this app or this permissions, they just get useless because they don't support the scopes that you need for your specific use case. So I'm gonna show you that and explain you that in an actual setup. So you can see here, once I click on add, we have to select a connection type, which can be either company or location. Again, company is the agency level and location is the sub-accounts. In both cases, it doesn't really matter what you select. I'm gonna just do the same thing with the location level right now. And once I click on save, you will see that it brings me to a redirect. And this creates this kind of URL up here, which is the URL we're getting authenticated with. So now you just need to keep in mind that we defined earlier the scopes in the URL, which is the exact same thing with this URL too. The only difference is I'm going to take this URL and I'm going to run it through an URL parser so that you can actually see the information that is in it, which again helps us to understand the scopes. I'm just going to type URL parser online. I'm going to take the first one I find. So now we're just going to put this URL in, I parse it, and as you can see down here, there's a list of scopes defined. And as you can see, I'm just going to zoom in a bit. You can see it has campaigns read-only, companies read-only. It is mostly only the read-only setups, which means you cannot really interact and create calendars, create events, etc. These are the only permissions that are set. And as you can see, based on the scopes here, there are tons of others that could be set, which is just not what Make.com directly supports out of the box. So those are the only ones defined with a standard module, which is usually not enough. So I definitely not recommend this direct integration with Make.com, and better just use the custom setup that I have right here. Anyways, this is just as an extra explanation so you have an understanding of why I'm not keen of using the high-level connector setup with the API call. I'm using this custom setup right here, and you will not need to create any of those. You will get this exact template directly inside of my resource hub as a download so that you can get started with creating your very own app on GoHighLevel, and you can start leveraging that right in your business. That's all I have to say for now. I know it's a very long video and my voice is nearly gone, but I really hope you got the value out of it that you were looking for, because this stuff probably saves you days of issues with the support, going back and forth, etc. I really hope it was as helpful as it was for me. Thanks for watching, and if there's anything else we can help you with, definitely drop me a message below in the comments or reach out to my team through my website. Very, very happy about any kind of inquiries. And that's all I got to say for now. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.